Hi, and welcome once again to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is November 4th, and today we're going to talk about a very pretty hobby. Our title is DIY, flower drying at home.
And what an appropriate time to discuss this hobby. Now, probably in November, flowers are a little harder to come by, but there is sort of an alternative hobby that relates very closely here. I was always a fan, back in the late fall, finding a big, beautiful maple leaf in our northern forest and just sticking it in a book and making it the most beautiful bookmark you could ever use for a whole season. And then next year, you have another good reason to head back out into the forest and find a new one.
I used to do that too, but usually with little flowers, wildflowers. Yeah, and I kept them. It wasn't a hobby. It was just something, that's a pretty flower. You pick it, and then you're reading a book, and then you put it in, and there you go.
I loved finding like just the biggest, most vivid, beautiful, vibrant leaf I could. And it was just such a pleasure to open your book and you would start getting that earthy smell in your book that they already kind of have. And it was just such a lovely thing. And when I was reading this topic, that's what I kept thinking of. I just wanted to just stick my boots on and just go march in the mountains and find a new one.
That's right. But for me personally, I was pretty careful about which flowers that I used as bookmarks because if it's a zinnia or a rose, they contain a lot of moisture and you're probably going to ruin those pages. So you're going to have to put some kind of protection around the flower, either cardboard or some kind of plastic or whatever. Otherwise, you're going to ruin your book.
Yeah, I was not careful at all about that. I mean, to be fair, I dried the leaf. I would try to take one that clearly was not rotting at that point.
Yeah.
Like it was a pretty fresh fallen leaf in November at this time. I mean, we know there's lots of leaves falling at this time. And I would get like spots in my books, but these books are long gone at this point. So I get the feeling that I might have accelerated their decomposition or their breaking down.
Leaves are not so bad. They're usually flatter and they have moisture, but not nearly as much. Well, anyway, we're going to talk about the whole issue of flower drying because flowers last such a short time. Yeah. They're so beautiful. But one part of their beauty is because they don't come by often. And when they come by, they don't last long, and that makes them even more precious.
There's that really fancy word, ephemeral. And I really like this word. This is ephemeral is something that lasts only for a short time. Think sort of, flowers are a perfect example of that. They're here for a very short period of time. And when they're gone, you need to wait until next season.
And that's especially appropriate for Chris and me because we come from the northern part of the U.S. We are both from very northern states. And there's something called spring ephemerals. So after this long, bitter winter that we have survived, the weather finally gets nice. The snow has melted. The birds are coming. Immediately, you have a riot of color with beautiful flowers that don't last long. Those are called spring ephemerals. They're wildflowers, and they're very beautiful, usually very tiny flowers.
Yeah, I love them, too. I remember my wife really enjoyed them, too. When we lived a little bit down south for a short period of time when we were back in the United States. And that's a great word that you use here, a riot of color. Now, you probably know riot as people fighting or smashing things in protest or out of anger, but a riot of color. I see all these reds and yellows everywhere. What a great word.
That's right. In Chinese, you often say 5 colors, 6 colors, or something like that to show it's a lot of colors. Ephemeral is spelled E-P-H-E-M-E-R-A-L. E-P-H-E-M-E-R-A-L. It is an adjective. For example, it is very ephemeral. It means it doesn't last long. But we can use it as a noun when we're talking about those flowers that don't last long, spring ephemerals. Let's get down to our article. Our title again is DIY, flower drying at home. DIY, I think everybody knows in Taiwan. I learned it when I was in Taiwan. I didn't even know it in the States because I've been here so long.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
I didn't see it as DIY. Back in the States, it was so long ago, we would say do it yourself. All right, we're going to jump right into the article. So we're going to talk about flower drying today and different ways of doing it. For people who love flowers, drying flowers to keep them from withering is a fun hobby. Dried flowers last much longer than the normal lifespan of a flower. If you're interested in starting a flower collection or preserving a bouquet as a keepsake, here are 2 methods to try.
Air drying method. This is a traditional method used for centuries. It's also quite simple. First, cut off any excess leaves and trim the stems of your flowers, but leave at least 6 inches of length. After that, you use twine, ribbon, or string to tie your bunch of flowers securely together. Then, all that is left to do is to hang them upside down to dry, but avoid hanging them in moist areas. Also, keep them away from light. Otherwise, the flower's color may fade during the drying process, which takes about 2 to 3 weeks.
Microwave method. This method is relatively new compared to the air drying method. It is great for preserving flowers in full bloom. However, you'll need a microwave oven and something called silica gel. First, cut off the stems close to the base of the flower. Next, add silica gel to a microwave-safe container. The silica gel should be about 2 to 3 centimeters deep. Then, place the blooms in the container and sprinkle a bit more of the silica gel over the flowers and between the petals. Place the container into the microwave and heat it for 2 to 5 minutes. Once the flowers feel dry, take the container out of the microwave and cover it with a lid for 24 hours. Be sure to open the top slightly for it to vent.
Using either of these methods will create lovely decorations that look great for months or even years.
Okay, we're going to go back to the beginning, but like Chris, I was also thinking back of the times that I used to save flowers in books and keep them. I don't know what I kept them for, but it's kind of fun. Like maybe 10 years later, you open the book and, oh my gosh, I saved a flower.
Yeah, sometimes you forget you have one, and what a lovely surprise.
That's right. And sometimes you can take these dried flowers. In the past, when we used to write letters on paper, we would paste one at the top as a decoration. It made pretty stationery.
That's lovely. Yeah, I mean, you could buy cute stuff like that, but I agree. There's a certain personal touch when you do something like that.
That's right. And this is not recent because if you read any classical novels in English, you will often read about mostly female characters saving flowers like this and drying flowers. So this goes back.
Yeah, this feels very Baroque to me. This idea of like writing a letter and pinning the flower to the top. It feels very fancy.
I've just read about it many times in old novels. So this goes back quite a while. Okay, so our title again, DIY, flower drying at home. Note that flower and drying are both nouns, so we don't stress drying. It is a compound. We don't say flower drying. We say flower drying. DIY, flower drying at home. So we know that we're going to get some instructions on how to do a home craft, basically. So our first paragraph, for people who love flowers, drying flowers to keep them from withering is a fun hobby. This sentence does not have a lot of new information because I think most people are aware of flower drying and doing it for fun. The main thing to get from this sentence, I think, is the word withering. To wither, that means that you are no longer crisp and bright and strong and fresh looking. You are now starting to fade, to lose moisture, and to discolor. You're losing your color. It's turning kind of brown. And eventually the flower is rotted. That's withering.
Now, people can also wither as well. So think you feel very brave and very bold, and you march into your boss's office, and you demand a raise, or you're leaving. And the boss says, okay, well, see you later. And suddenly you lose your nerve, you lose your confidence, or maybe the boss starts to give you march in, and the boss just looks at you in the eye, and the feeling just fades, and that's to wither.
I withered under the pressure. There we go. Okay. Next sentence, dried flowers last much longer than the normal lifespan of a flower. Now, I would have said this differently. This is fine, and the word lifespan is a good word to know. I would just say dried flowers last much longer than fresh flowers. That's what I would have said. Okay, so that means that this is one way of keeping at least some of the beauty of a flower, which normally does not last very long. If you're interested in starting a flower collection or preserving a bouquet as a keepsake, here are 2 methods to try. Now, I was talking about compounds earlier. In the title, we say flower drying. We don't say flower drying. Here we have 2 more. If you're interested in starting a flower collection, flower and collection are both nouns. We don't stress collection, a flower collection. And also keepsake. That means something that you keep because it has value as a memory, as a keepsake. For example, you will often keep a ring as a keepsake to remember your mother or something like that. That's a keepsake. We don't say keepsake, it's keepsake. All right, so we have now 2 methods to share with you on how to save flowers so they still look and stay pretty.
So before we move on to our first drying method, let's look at this word keepsake. Just like you were saying, this is a little bit different than a souvenir. A souvenir generally is something you buy at a place to take home and remember. A keepsake may be something that you have already had or someone has given to you and now you're keeping it around. The word sake is a really old word for because. It's like you do something because whatever. And so I'm doing this for the... That's right. I do it for the sake of the fun of it. And so keepsake together is you're keeping it because it's a memory. And the word bouquet is an old French word for wood, actually, interestingly, which makes me think of like really fragrant wood, which is really lovely. And of course, today, bouquet, we think more about flowers.
A bunch of flowers together, arranged nicely.
All right, let's jump to our first method, and this is the air drying method. This is a traditional method used for centuries.
I think that's pretty straightforward. Traditional means that we've been doing it a long time. So as I mentioned earlier, you will read about flower drying in very, very old novels. We've been doing this a very long time. So centuries are many hundreds of years.
This is a little bit of an understatement. The ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans were drying flowers. They were used as medicines. So centuries is a little bit of an understatement. This probably should be more like millennia.
Millennia, that's thousands of years.
It's also quite simple.
And that's a really simple sentence. We don't have to explain.
First, cut off any excess leaves and trim the stems of your flowers, but leave at least 6 inches of length.
So they're saying trim the stems. It does not mean to cut the whole thing off. They want you to keep 6 inches of it. So you can change that into centimeters so you have a better idea. So 1 inch is 2.5 centimeters. So change that into centimeters and you know about how long it is. But I don't think it really matters. You just leave as much as you want. If you have room in your book, make it long, make it short. Who cares? But the point is just keep a little more, keep a little bit of the flower and cut off the rest.
Yeah, and excess means is too much. You don't need this. And so you might trim the excess fat or trim the excess leaves here. Leave a few for the sake of the beauty of it. But all those extra leaves, kind of like you explained earlier, they contain extra water and that can damage your book. So removing a little bit keeps the art and also preserves the material itself.
That's right. Makes it more artistic.
Let's continue after that. You use twine, ribbon, or string to tie your bunch of flowers securely together.
If you are drying a bunch of flowers, use this method. So the method that I was talking about is usually just one single blossom. So it depends on what you want to do. Do you want just one flower or a bunch?
So twine is a hemp brown string. You've probably seen this. It's quite rough on your hands. String generally feels a little bit softer. And ribbon, of course, you can tie in your hair and it's very beautiful. But twine feels the roughest and it may even cut your hands up.
That's right. And it comes from the word two because you had two strands that you twisted together to make twine. So TWO2, TWINE, they have the same root.
Let's continue. Then all that is left to do is to hang them upside down to dry, but avoid hanging them in moist areas.
I don't know why that made me think of Dracula.
Like a bat, maybe?
Oh, because of hanging garlic.
Yeah.
And that would be upside down because you tie it by the stem at the bottom.
By the stem there, not the bulb, right?
That's right. It made me think of Dracula. And
please.
No, I'm not fond of vampires.
Well, there was a lovely cafe. I only went to it once in Taipei, and my wife brought me there, and we were just dating at the time. We were a really new couple, and they had just air dried flowers everywhere.
Oh.
Every inch of this place was covered in like lavender that was dried out and herbs and rosemary. And just walking into a cafe, generally you expect maybe roasted beans. And instead you were hit with this beautiful aroma of dried flowers.
Wow.
And it was so lovely. And I remember asking my wife why we never went back there. And she said it was like really far away. Oh. I don't recall traveling for a long time, but it was so unique. And if you ever happen to have gone there, it was extremely memorable. Who knows if it's still around? But boy, what a lovely scent that was. And to see all them everywhere was just what a memorable sight.
The fragrance. Because
so lovely.
Very often fragrances and smells, they will elicit very strong emotions.
Yes. Let's continue here to our next sentence. Also, keep them away from lights. Here's more Dracula references. Otherwise, the flower's color may fade during the drying process, which takes about 2 to 3 weeks.
Actually, I should have mentioned this after the previous sentence because avoid hanging them in moist areas. Where are you going to find a place like that in Taiwan?
Like a dank castle? Like, are we still going with the Dracula theme?
Well, it's not that. It's just that wherever you live, well, maybe in the south, okay, because we live in the north, it's moist everywhere.
Moist everywhere, yeah.
And it's moist most of the year.
That is the one thing I've never gotten quite used to, how moist the air is here all the time, and how do you even contain it all? It's so difficult.
There are advantages because actually it's better for your skin. It keeps your skin hydrated. It's better that way. But a few years ago before COVID, I went to France, and the first thing I felt is, oh, the air is so nice and dry. I love it. It felt so good, and I didn't have to do my hair all the time because moisture makes your hair curl. So, yeah, I think a lot of us who grew up in a drier climate, we kind of miss that.
You kind of miss that. Now, just before we go to our next paragraph, these dried flowers, this old air drying method, this was the only way to keep fresh flowers for virtually all of history until about the last 100 or so years. So you think 99.9% of history, no one could ever get a flower out of season. And this was the only way that a scientist in another part of the world could ever see a flower that was not local to them. And so you needed to dry them, preserve them, and then take them home. When we think of Columbus bringing things back to Europe, he had to do a lot of drying to prove that he had gone to where he said he did. These were known as winter bouquets. You couldn't go to the flower shop and buy fresh flowers from some faraway place. You had to get a winter bouquet, which were dried out flowers.
Okay, let's move on to the microwave method. This method is relatively new compared to the air drying method. Again, it's a pretty easy sentence. Watch for hyphens. So we have the air drying method. Those two words have a hyphen between them. Remember that for spelling. So this is another way of drying flowers, but it's quite new. It is great for preserving flowers in full bloom. So as we mentioned earlier, flowers have a lot of moisture, and when they're in full bloom, they have a lot of moisture. And this is an especially good method for that kind of flower at that point in its growth. However, you'll need a microwave oven and something called silica gel. So those are two things you need. I do not use a microwave anymore. I don't think it's a really healthy way to heat things up. It's personal. And then you'll also need some silica gel. And then you'll have to look in the vocabulary for that.
I want to point out that you said microwave because I always feel people, who says microwave oven anymore? No one does, right? That's one of those words that technically you could say microwave oven. But if you say microwave plus oven, you sound like you're like from the 1980s.
However, if we haven't been talking about kitchens and we suddenly introduce a new topic, we might add oven just so that the person has enough time to process it. So you'll need a microwave oven. I'm giving you time to think because we weren't talking about kitchens before. After that, we will certainly just call it microwave.
Also, interestingly, silica gel was something I thought was a relatively new invention. It was kind of formulated in 1640. 1640.
That's good to know. I didn't know that. Let's keep going. First, cut off the stems close to the base of the flower. So instead of telling you to save 6 inches of the stem, here we're going to cut off the stem right next to the flower, the base of the flower. Next, add silica gel to a microwave-safe container, and don't use plastic. No plastic is safe in a microwave, so probably glass. You add silica gel. Then, the silica gel should be about 2 to 3 centimeters deep. That just tells us how much we should pour in relative to how big the container is. Then, place the blooms in the container and sprinkle a bit more of the silica gel over the flowers and between the petals. Why do they use silica gel? Because silica gel absorbs water, and that's what they put in all your snacks and all kinds of foods, cookies and things, so that it does not get too damp and start molding really easily.
It's that little plastic bag you find when you buy a new bag, there's that little tiny plastic bag in the bottom somewhere. That's what silica gel is, those little balls.
That little bag that says, do not eat.
But you know it's non-toxic. You could totally eat it, but don't, okay? Don't.
Dumb idea. All right, place the container into the microwave and heat it for 2 to 5 minutes. So the silica gel all by itself is going to absorb a lot of water from whatever is around it, but this hurries up the process, speeds up the process. Once the flowers feel dry, take the container out of the microwave and cover it with a lid for 24 hours. So open up the microwave and look at what you see in there. And if the flowers are dry about the way you want them, so take it out of the oven and then cover cover the top with a lid, but leave it open a little bit so that steam can get out, so it can actually let some of the moisture out. And that is mentioned in the next sentence, which says, be sure to open the top slightly for it to vent. Vent means a space where moisture or hot air or anything can get out.
If you're angry, sometimes you just need to talk about it. That is to vent also.
Okay, so Chris, I have something I have to tell you, but I'm going to vent, so be ready.
Yeah, exactly. This is to vent, where you start letting those emotions out.
That's right. And if I didn't warn Chris first, I'd start yelling and like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so excited? But if I tell him ahead of time I have to vent, he's just going to fold his arms and say, okay, go ahead.
Time to listen. That's right.
Time to listen. Exactly.
Let's continue. Using either of these methods will create lovely decorations that look great for months or even years, but one is way more romantic than the other.
That's true. That's true. But it looks like the second one is pretty effective. It works pretty well. Note that using here is a gerund, and that makes this part of the sentence, it looks like a verb phrase, but it's actually our subject, so it turns into a noun. All right, let's look at our questions. Question number 1.
Which word in the passage means becoming drier and smaller and starting to die?
It's a word that we actually spent quite a bit of time talking about and trying to explain, and that is the word withering. Withering. Number 2, please fill in the blanks with the information contained in the passage.
Okay, we have a table here.
We have methods, tools, and drying duration. Now, these are the topics at the top. These are the categories we have. Our first row is the first method, namely the air drying method. And the tools that we need are
twine, ribbon, or string.
And the answer we have to supply is the drying duration if we use the air drying method. And how long does it usually take if we use this first method?
And our answer is 2 to 3 weeks, and it looks lovely.
That's right. Okay, and our second method in the third row is the microwave method. What tools do we need for that method?
Well, we need a microwave. You need a microwave-safe container and another blank.
In addition, we need something else, and that is silica gel. So that's the answer there. And the drying duration takes about how long?
2 to 5 minutes.
That takes care of number 2. Number 3, which of the following statements are true according to the passage? So sometimes they want you to pick which one is not true. This time, pick the ones which are true. And letter A.
Water might cause flowers to lose their color when they are hung to dry.
No, that's not it. Water doesn't do that. B. Flowers must be dipped in silica gel before being placed in a dark room. No, this is wrong. We're using a microwave and we're not dipping. All right, letter C.
The air drying method uses less equipment than the microwave method.
And that's true. We really don't need any special equipment for that. So C is one answer. Let's keep going. D, the microwave method has been around longer than the air drying method. Wrong. That is a new method.
Letter E, before being put in a microwave to dry, flowers have to be hung for 24 hours, and that is also wrong.
Wrong. That leaves, we have one more, and that's letter F. Flowers have to be removed from the stems if they are to be dried in the microwave. That is true. That is our second correct answer. And with that, we are finished for today. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.